Get out of my chair right now, little girl, because the real heir has arrived. Those were the first words my mother spoke to me after abandoning me on a porch 24 years ago. She crashed my wealthy uncle's will reading, expecting to walk away with a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. She thought I was still the terrified 11-year-old she threw away. She had no idea she was stepping directly into a trap that would end with her facing federal charges. I am Simone. I am 35 years old, and I work as a commercial real estate strategist. Exactly 1 week ago, I lost the only real family I ever had when my uncle Roland passed away. I was sitting alone in the sprawling glass-walled boardroom of a prestigious downtown Atlanta law firm. The space was freezing, the kind of aggressive air conditioning designed to keep corporate lawyers awake during 20-hour negotiations. I was staring at the intricate wood grain of the massive mahogany table, tracing the lines with my eyes. I was exhausted. My heart was broken. I had spent the last 7 days arranging a funeral, picking out a casket, and burying the man who raised me. The absolute last thing I expected was for the heavy glass doors of the boardroom to be shoved open so violently that they slammed against the metal stoppers. I looked up expecting to see the estate attorney. Instead, the air was immediately sucked out of the room. Standing in the doorway was a woman I had not seen in 24 years. Brenda, my mother. She marched into the room like she owned the entire skyscraper. She was drenched in a suffocating cloud of cheap floral perfume that instantly overpowered the smell of expensive leather and polished wood. She wore an overly bright yellow blazer that was a size too small, and she was clutching a painfully obvious knockoff designer handbag like it was a royal scepter. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor as she bypassed all the empty chairs lining the sides of the long table. She made a beeline straight for the head of the table. "Straight for me. Get up," she snapped. She did not say hello. She did not offer condolences for her own brother's death. She did not ask how I was doing. She just pointed a manicured finger with chipped red polish directly at my face. "Get out of that chair right now. The head of the table belongs to the matriarch of this family, and you are sitting in my seat." Before I tell you how my mother's greedy little boardroom stunt ended with her facing felony fraud charges, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who thought they could walk all over you and underestimate your worth. I sat perfectly still. For a split second, my brain struggled to process the sheer audacity of the woman standing over me. 24 years, 288 months of absolute silence. Not a single birthday card, not a phone call, not a text message. She had dropped me off on Roland's front porch when I was 11 years old, with nothing but a black trash bag full of hand-me-down clothes. She told me to wait on the steps while she went to the gas station. She never came back. Now here she was, standing in a high-rise legal office, demanding I surrender my chair, because she suddenly remembered she was family. "I am not moving, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady. I did not call her mom. She had lost the right to that title a lifetime ago. Her jaw dropped in exaggerated offense. "Excuse me. I know you did not just address me by my first name. I am your mother. You will show me some respect. Now grab your little purse and move down to the side where the children sit. The adults are about to handle Roland's business." I slowly took a sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinked softly against the glass, echoing in the tense silence of the room. "You have no business here, Brenda," I said, setting the glass down. "This is a private legal meeting for Uncle Roland's estate. You are not on the visitor log downstairs. You do not have an appointment. I am frankly amazed the receptionist even let you pass the security desk." Brenda slammed her hands down on the mahogany table, leaning forward in an attempt to intimidate me. "I do not need an appointment to collect what belongs to me." She hissed, her eyes wide with frantic greed. "Roland was my older brother. We shared blood. That means everything he built belongs to me now." I am the closest living relative. I am the matriarch. You are just some stray he felt sorry for. Do not think for 1 second you are going to steal my inheritance, little girl. The sheer delusion radiating from her was almost physical. She actually believed that genetics entitled her to millions of dollars. She believed that because she shared a last name with a man she had ignored for over 2 decades, she was suddenly going to walk out of this law firm with the keys to his empire. She looked around the luxurious boardroom, her eyes practically glowing with dollar signs, taking in the skyline view of Atlanta through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was already spending his money in her head. She did not care about the decades of grueling work Roland put into building his commercial real estate portfolio. She only cared about cashing the check. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair and crossed my arms. "Do you even know how he died, Brenda?" I asked her softly. "Do you even know what his final words were, or what color his casket was?" She waved her hand dismissively, her fake gold bracelets clanking loudly against the wood. "Oh, spare me the emotional guilt trip. People die every day, Simone. It is a tragedy, yes, but we have to be practical. Roland was a bachelor with no wife and no real kids. He had a duty to provide for his real family. I had to make a lot of sacrifices in my life, and now it is time for the universe to pay me back. Now I am not going to ask you again. Get out of my chair before I lose my temper." I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice. I simply smiled a cold, humorless smile. "Lose your temper, Brenda. See what happens. Because the only thing you are going to get out of this room today is an escort out of the building by armed security." She gasped, clutching her chest like I had physically struck her. The entitlement was deeply ingrained in her bones. She honestly thought she could storm into a professional environment, bark orders, and assert dominance over a woman who had spent the last 15 years building a career in corporate warfare. She thought I was weak because I used to be a terrified little girl crying on a porch. She did not realize that the terrified little girl died a long time ago, and the woman sitting in front of her was someone she could not manipulate, control, or bully. I watched her chest heave with indignation. She was gearing up for a full-blown tantrum, the kind of loud, embarrassing public meltdown she used to throw in grocery stores when she did not get her way. I could see the muscles in her neck tightening as she prepared to scream. But before she could unleash her fit, the heavy glass doors swung open a second time. She was not alone. She had brought reinforcements, and the nightmare was only just beginning. Stepping through the heavy glass doors was Jada, my younger sister, the undisputed golden child of the family. She was the reason my mother claimed she had to abandon me. She was the one who got the cruise vacations, the private tutoring, and the endless stream of affection while I was left standing on a porch with a trash bag. Jada was clinging tightly to the arm of her husband Terrence. They walked into the boardroom with the synchronized arrogance of people who believed they had just won the lottery. Jada was dressed in head-to-toe designer labels that I knew for a fact she could not afford. She had a tissue pressed theatrically against her dry eyes, playing the role of the grieving niece. Terrence walked a step ahead of her, his chest puffed out inside a tailored suit that was far too flashy for a morning legal meeting. He looked around the prestigious law firm with hungry eyes, assessing the expensive artwork on the walls and the plush leather chairs like he was a king inspecting his new castle. Brenda stepped aside, crossing her arms with a smug look of satisfaction on her face. Her reinforcements had arrived. Terrence marched right up to the mahogany table. He did not offer his condolences. He did not even say good morning. He simply unclasped his faux leather briefcase and tossed it onto the polished wood right in front of me. The briefcase slid across the slick surface and bumped roughly into my glass of water, nearly knocking it over. He did not apologize. He looked down his nose at me with a smirk that made my blood run cold. Then he did something that absolutely sealed his fate. He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers directly in my face. The sharp cracking sound echoed through the silent boardroom, bouncing off the glass walls. It was a gesture reserved for dismissing a servant or calling a dog. "Simone," he said, stretching my name out with a mocking drawl. "Be a good girl and run down to the lobby for us. The real heirs have a lot of complex financial matters to discuss today, and we need caffeine. I take my coffee black. Jada wants a caramel latte. Go on now, hurry up. Jada sniffled loudly, dropping the dry tissue into her expensive handbag. And make sure they use oat milk, Simone. My stomach has been incredibly sensitive lately, with all this terrible grief. Losing Uncle Roland has just been devastating for my nervous system. Devastating. I stared at her. Jada had not spoken to Uncle Roland in 10 years. The last time she saw him was when she showed up at his office demanding he pay for her lavish destination wedding. When he politely declined and offered a reasonable cash gift instead, she threw a massive tantrum, called him a selfish old man, and stormed out. She had not reached out to him once when he was in the hospital. She did not bother to show up at his funeral last week because she claimed it was raining and the humidity would ruin her hair. But now, sitting in a room where millions of dollars were about to be discussed, she was suddenly a heartbroken victim, crippled by grief. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of the rage burning in my chest. In my line of work as a commercial real estate strategist, you learn very quickly that the person who loses their temper first is the person who loses the negotiation. You never let your opponent see you sweat. And these three were not just opponents. They were walking vulnerabilities, wrapping themselves in fake confidence. I reached out with a steady hand and righted my glass of water, pushing Terrence's cheap briefcase a few inches away. I brought the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The silence in the room stretched out, pulling tight like a piano wire. Terrence shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable that his alpha male routine had not sent me scurrying out the door. Brenda tapped her foot impatiently. I set the glass down on the wooden table with a soft thud. I folded my hands perfectly still. "Tell me, Terrence," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register. "Did the bank finally padlock the gates at that failing used car lot of yours, or did you just decide to skip town before the repo men showed up?" The smug smile vanished from his face instantly. He took a quick step back, his eyes darting toward Brenda and Jada, as if I had just slapped him across the mouth. His face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck began to bulge against his tight collar. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "What are you talking about? My dealership is perfectly fine. We are in a strategic transition phase right now. It is high-level business strategy. I would not expect a glorified secretary like you to understand it." I let out a short, hollow laugh that held zero warmth. A strategic transition phase. Is that what the financial world is calling 3 consecutive quarters of defaulting on a commercial lease? Because I know for an absolute fact that your landlord sent a final notice to vacate last Thursday. They are preparing to seize your remaining inventory by the end of the week to cover your back rent. So it makes perfect sense that you have the free time to crash a private legal meeting on a Tuesday morning. You do not have a job to go to. You are completely broke. Jada gasped, grabbing Terrence by the arm. "How dare you speak to my husband like that?" She shrieked, her fake grief instantly evaporating into pure hostility. He is an entrepreneur. He understands high-level finance and wealth management. That is exactly why Mom put him in charge of managing Uncle Roland's assets. He is going to be the portfolio director for the estate. You are just jealous because you sit in a cubicle all day while we are building a legacy. I looked at Brenda, who was standing tall, looking incredibly proud of her son-in-law. The sheer comedy of their stupidity was almost too much to process. They were planning to put a man who was drowning in massive debt, a man who could not even keep a gravel lot of used sedans afloat, in charge of a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate portfolio. They thought business was just wearing a suit and barking orders at people. They had absolutely no idea how corporate law or estate management actually worked. They just saw a giant pile of cash and thought they could scoop it up. "You are going to regret opening your mouth," Terrence sneered, leaning over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "You think you are so smart with your little real estate job. You think you can talk down to me. I am the man of this family now. I call the shots. And I am telling you to get up Get the coffee and get out of our sight before I make things very ugly for you." He pointed that same arrogant finger right at my face. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to back down, just like Brenda had expected me to surrender my chair. They were all playing from the same tired playbook, relying on aggression and volume to get their way. But they were fighting a war I had already won before they even walked into the building. I smiled, looking directly into his angry, panicked eyes. "Make it ugly, Terrence. I dare you." Terrence slammed both of his hands onto the mahogany table directly in front of me. The impact made my glass of sparkling water shudder, but I did not blink. He leaned his entire body forward, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to cast a shadow over my chair. It was a classic intimidation tactic. The kind of aggressive posturing insecure men use when they realize their words hold absolutely no weight. He was breathing heavily through his nose and his eyes were wide with a mix of fury and panic. "You think this is a joke, Simone?" He snarled, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. "You think you can sit there and disrespect my family, disrespect my business?" "I am not going to ask you politely again. I am going to pick up that phone on the conference table and I am going to call the building security. I will tell them there is a hostile trespasser harassing the rightful heirs of the estate. I will have armed guards come up here and physically drag you out of this room by your hair if I have to." Jada nodded eagerly from behind him, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "Do it, Terrence," she urged, her voice dripping with venom. "Call them right now. She is trespassing. She has no right to be here making us uncomfortable in our time of mourning." I looked at Terrence. Then I looked at the heavy multi-line corporate phone sitting in the center of the table. I did not reach for it to stop him. Instead, I reached into the breast pocket of my blazer and pulled out my silver heavy-barrel fountain pen. I let out a laugh. It was not a nervous chuckle or a defensive scoff. It was a genuine deep laugh of pure amusement that echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. The sound completely derailed Terrence. He froze, his hand hovering halfway toward the phone. I brought the tip of my silver pen down against the mahogany table. Tap, tap, tap. The sharp metallic sound cut through the heavy silence in the room. "Please, Terrence," I said, gesturing toward the phone with my free hand. "Be my guest. Pick it up, dial 0 for the front desk. Tell them exactly what you just told me. But before you do, I highly recommend you take a look at the ceiling right above the door you just walked through." Terrence frowned, his heavy brow furrowing in confusion. He slowly turned his head, looking back over his shoulder. Jada and Brenda followed his gaze, looking up at the polished metal and glass fixtures. Nestled discreetly in the top right corner of the room was a small black dome, with a solid red light glowing steadily in the center. "That is a high-definition security camera, Terrence," I explained, my voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "You are currently standing inside the executive boardroom of one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state of Georgia. They handle multi-billion-dollar mergers and high-profile estate planning. That camera captures crystal-clear video and highly sensitive audio. It has been recording every single word you have said since you shoved those doors open." Terrence swallowed hard, the lump in his throat bobbing nervously. He pulled his hand away from the telephone, taking a half step back from the table. "So go ahead and call security." I continued, holding his gaze. "Tell the armed guards that you want to physically assault the only person in this room who actually has legal clearance to be here. I am sure the Atlanta Police Department will find the footage incredibly compelling when I press charges for terroristic threats and attempted assault." Terrence was completely speechless. The tough guy facade shattered into a million pieces, leaving behind a terrified man drowning in debt, who suddenly realized he was out of his depth. He bumped into Jada as he backed away, running a hand over his sweating forehead. I turned my attention away from him. He was neutralized. My focus shifted back to the root of the infection. Brenda. She was staring at the camera, her jaw tight, her eyes calculating. She was trying to figure out how to spin the situation. "Which brings me to my next question, Brenda," I said, tapping my pen one more time to command her attention. This law firm occupies the top 3 floors of this high-rise. The elevators are locked down. You need a verified visitor badge or a corporate keycard just to select the 40th floor. You are not on the scheduled visitor log for today. So how exactly did the 3 of you bypass the lobby security desk downstairs? Brenda straightened her bright yellow blazer, pulling her shoulders back. She was cornered, but a narcissist never admits defeat. They just double down on their delusions. I did not need a piece of plastic to come up here, she declared, lifting her chin defiantly. I am Roland's sister. When that little girl at the front desk asked for my ID, I told her exactly who I was. I told her I was the matriarch of the family, and we were here to claim what was rightfully ours. She tried to tell me I needed an appointment, but some lawyer in a suit swiped his card to come through the glass gates, and we simply walked in behind him. You tailgated an employee into a restricted corporate office, I stated flatly, shaking my head. You bullied a receptionist and trespassed into a secure building because you think sharing DNA with a man you ignored for 24 years makes you royalty. I am royalty in this family. Brenda snapped, slamming her knockoff bag onto an empty chair. I do not need an invitation to handle my own brother's affairs. Blood is the ultimate VIP pass, Simone. You can sit there in your fancy suit and try to use big words to scare my son-in-law, but you cannot change the facts. Roland is dead. I am his oldest living relative. The law says the money goes to the family, not to the stray dog he took in when nobody else wanted her. Jada smirked, stepping out from behind Terrence now that the threat of the security camera had settled into a new normal. Mom is right, Simone. You are just trying to stall because you know you are walking out of here with nothing. You should be thanking us for even letting you sit in that chair for this long. Mom could have easily had you banned from the funeral, but she has a good heart. A good heart. I let the words hang in the air, letting the sheer absurdity of their claims settle over the room. They truly believed that the legal system operated on the principle of biological entitlement. They thought the courts would simply hand over millions of dollars because Brenda yelled loudly enough and demanded respect. They had no concept of trusts, no understanding of estate law, and absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. I stopped tapping my pen and placed it gently on the table, lining it up perfectly parallel to my notepad. You are right, Brenda, I said softly, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany surface. You are his oldest sister, and you are absolutely convinced that gives you the right to every dime he ever made. So why do not you show me exactly what you brought with you today to prove it? Because I know you did not just come all the way downtown to yell at me. You came here with a plan. Let us see it. Jada saw her husband backing down and immediately realized their strategy of intimidation had failed miserably. Terrence was completely neutralized, staring at the red light of the security camera like it was the barrel of a loaded weapon. So Jada pivoted. She stepped out from behind his broad shoulders and fell back on the one weapon my family always used when they found themselves cornered by the truth. Emotional manipulation. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh, pressing both hands against her chest, and positioned herself as the righteous, heartbroken defender of our mother. You are so cold, Simone. Jada said, her voice shaking with forced emotion. Her performance was almost Oscar-worthy. You sit up here in your glass tower in your expensive tailored suit and you judge us. You judge Mom. You have absolutely no idea what she went through. You have no idea the heartbreaking sacrifices she had to make just to keep a roof over our heads when we were growing up. I stared at Jada, letting her dig the hole deeper. She was practically vibrating with self-righteousness. She was 3 years younger than me. She had never known a single day of hardship in her entire life. Mom was a single mother. Jada continued, wiping a non-existent tear from her meticulously contoured cheek. She was struggling every single day. She cried herself to sleep every single night, worrying about how she was going to feed us. She made the ultimate sacrifice giving you to Uncle Roland. She knew he had money. She knew he had a big house and could give you a better life. A life she could not afford to give you at the time. It broke her heart to let you go, but she did it because she loved you. And this is how you repay her. By treating her like a criminal in her own brother's law firm. You owe her respect, Simone. You owe her everything. The silence that followed Jada's little speech was heavy and thick. Brenda was looking down at the mahogany floor, acting like a wounded martyr, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Terrence had recovered enough to nod along, looking deeply offended on his mother-in-law's behalf. They had rehearsed this narrative for so long that they actually believed it. They had rewritten history to turn an act of profound, devastating child abandonment into a tragic tale of maternal sacrifice. They wanted me to bow my head and thank the woman who threw me away. I looked at the three of them standing there in their cheap clothes and their massive delusions. I felt my heartbeat steady in my chest. A deep, rhythmic thumping that grounded me in the present moment. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the crushing pain of that terrified 11-year-old girl anymore. I only felt a cold surgical precision. It was time to gut their fairy tale and spread the truth all over this expensive table. Sacrifices. I repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the freezing air of the boardroom. You really want to talk about sacrifices, Jada? Let us talk about July 12, 1998. Let us talk about the exact day Mom made her heartbreaking sacrifice. Brenda's head snapped up. The look of a wounded martyr vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of genuine, unfiltered panic. She knew exactly what date I was talking about. Her posture went rigid. I turned my gaze directly to my mother, pinning her to the spot. Do you want to tell your golden child the truth, Brenda, or should I? I asked, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Because my memory of that day is crystal clear. It is burned into my brain. I remember standing on Uncle Roland's front porch. I remember the concrete was burning hot through the worn-out soles of my cheap sneakers. I remember holding a black plastic trash bag. Not a suitcase, not a duffel bag, a trash bag. Jada frowned, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in confusion. She looked back and forth between me and our mother. Mom, what is she talking about? Jada asked, her voice faltering slightly. What trash bag? I did not let Brenda formulate a lie. I kept going, my voice steady and relentless, swinging like a battering ram against their glass house. Inside that trash bag were 3 faded t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans that were too short for me, and a pair of shoes with a hole in the toe. There were no photographs. There were no toys. There was not a single comforting item from my childhood. You pulled up to the curb, you handed me the bag, and you told me to wait on the steps because you needed to run to the gas station to get us some snacks. You looked me right in the eyes and promised you would be right back. I paused, letting the terrible weight of the memory crush the air out of the room. You never came back, Brenda. I sat on that hot concrete for 9 hours. I watched the sun go down. I watched the streetlights flicker on. I did not move because I was terrified that if I walked away, you would come back and I would miss you. I sat there until Uncle Roland finally came home from work at 8 o'clock at night and found me curled up asleep next to his welcome mat, shivering in the dark. That is a lie, Brenda shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me, her cheap bracelets clanking loudly. I called him. I made arrangements with Roland beforehand. I made sure you were safe before I left. You did not call him. I fired back, stepping out from behind my chair. My voice finally rose just enough to dominate the entire room. He had absolutely no idea I was coming. He spent the first 3 hours frantically calling hospitals and police stations because he thought you had been in a terrible car accident. He could not fathom that a mother would just dump her child like a stray dog on a porch. It took him 2 weeks to finally track you down. And do you remember where you were, Brenda, when he finally got you on the phone? Brenda closed her eyes tightly, turning her head away, as if she could hide from the truth. Stop it, she hissed through clenched teeth. I am not going to stop, I said, walking slowly around the edge of the table, closing the distance between us. You were not working 3 jobs. You were not crying yourself to sleep over your impossible choices. You were in the Bahamas. You were on a month-long luxury cruise with that guy you met at the casino. Calvin, I think his name was. The guy who drove the red convertible. Jada gasped, taking a large step away from her mother. A cruise? What are you talking about, Mom? You told me you sent Simone to a special boarding school because she was acting out. You told me she ran away. She lied to you, Jada. I said, not taking my eyes off the woman who gave birth to me. Just like she lied to everyone else in this family. She did not leave me because she was broke. She left me because she had just cashed a massive $20,000 child support back payment check from your father. She had plenty of money. She had tens of thousands of dollars sitting in a checking account. But her new boyfriend Calvin did not like kids. He wanted a fun, carefree vacation. And you were always her favorite, Jada. So she took the money, she packed her bags, she bought you a whole new designer wardrobe, and she simply threw me away because I was an inconvenience to her new lifestyle. The boardroom was dead silent. The security camera in the corner continued its silent vigil, recording the exact moment the great matriarch's legacy was burned to ash. Terrence was staring at Brenda with his mouth slightly open. He might have been a greedy fool, but even he seemed shocked by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just laid out on the table. He slowly stepped away from her, creating a physical distance. You call that a sacrifice? I asked, stopping just a few feet away from Brenda. My voice dropped back to a lethal whisper. You call dumping your flesh and blood for a vacation with a stranger a sacrifice? Uncle Roland took me in because he had to. He stepped up because you walked out. He spent years paying for intense therapy to undo the psychological damage you caused in a single afternoon. He was my father, my mother, and my entire family. You are nothing to me, Brenda. You are just a biological accident. You are just a woman who happens to share my DNA. Brenda was shaking violently. Her face was a mask of pure, ugly rage. The victim act was completely gone. The loving mother facade had been ripped away, leaving only the bitter, selfish core of the woman she truly was. She slammed both of her hands on the table, glaring at me with a hatred so deep it was almost impressive. You ungrateful little brat. Brenda spat the words flying from her mouth like venom. I gave you life. I brought you into this world. I kept you fed and clothed for 11 years when I should have just left you at the hospital the day you were born. You were always a difficult child. You were always looking at me with those judging eyes, thinking you were better than me. Roland poisoned you against me. He filled your head with lies because he was jealous that I was out living my life while he was stuck in a boring office. I did not flinch. I did not care about her venom anymore. It had lost its power over me 2 decades ago. Her words were just empty noise bouncing off the walls. He did not have to poison me, Brenda. I replied calmly, turning my back on her and walking back to my chair. He just had to pick up the pieces you broke. And he did a phenomenal job, because while you were busy jumping from one bad decision to the next, he taught me how to survive. He taught me how to build an empire. Jada was breathing heavily, her carefully constructed worldview fracturing right in front of her. But she was too dependent on Brenda to fully turn against her. She desperately needed the narrative to shift back in their favor. She needed the money too badly to let morality or a little thing like child abandonment get in the way of her payday. The greed was stronger than her conscience. Whatever. Jada snapped, waving her hand dismissively as if trying to physically brush away the horrible truth I had just exposed. That is all in the past, Simone. It does not matter what happened 20 years ago. It has absolutely nothing to do with today. What matters is right now. What matters is that Uncle Roland is gone and we are his real family. We are the ones who are legally entitled to his estate. You can stand there and bring up ancient history all you want to make Mom look bad, but it does not change the law. It was a stunning display of cognitive dissonance. Jada had just learned that her mother had callously abandoned her sister for a Caribbean cruise, and her immediate reaction was to pivot straight back to the inheritance. It proved exactly what Uncle Roland had always said about them. They were black holes capable only of consuming everything around them, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. I slowly sat back down in my heavy leather chair. I felt remarkably light. Exposing the truth, speaking the reality of that day out loud in a room where they had tried to silence me, felt like taking a full, deep breath for the first time in a week. The air in the boardroom suddenly felt clear. Is that so, Jada? I asked, picking up my silver pen and twirling it effortlessly between my fingers. You really think the law is on your side? You think biology is a magic key that automatically unlocks bank vaults and real estate deeds? Brenda straightened up, recovering her aggressive posture. She smoothed down her bright yellow blazer and reached into her cheap handbag, her eyes flashing with a predatory gleam. I do not just think it, Simone. I know it, and I am entirely done playing these little emotional games with you. We did not come here to apologize for the past or listen to your sob stories. We came here to collect our future, and we are not leaving until we get exactly what we came for. The mask was finally gone. There were no more fake tears about being a struggling single mother. There were no more dramatic sighs about heartbreak and sacrifice. Brenda had realized that her emotional manipulation was completely useless against me, so she simply abandoned it. She shifted gears with the terrifying speed of a sociopath, dropping the grieving sister act and diving straight into raw, unfiltered greed. She reached across the mahogany table and tapped her long red fingernails against the polished wood. I want the keys to his house, Simone. She demanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. And I want the keys to his car. That vintage silver Porsche he kept parked in the garage. I also want his watch, the platinum Rolex he always wore. I know for a fact he took it off when he went into the hospital, so I know it is sitting in a safe somewhere. Hand them over right now. I stared at her, letting the absolute vulgarity of her request sink in. Uncle Roland had barely been in the ground for 48 hours. His headstone had not even been engraved yet. And here was his biological sister demanding his personal effects like she was looting a burning building. The Porsche and the Rolex. I repeated slowly, leaning back in my chair. You want me to reach into my purse and just hand over a classic car and a $40,000 timepiece before the estate attorney even walks into the room? Why the sudden rush, Brenda? I thought you were here to secure your legacy. Plundering a dead man's jewelry box feels a little desperate for a so-called matriarch. Brenda crossed her arms defensively, but her eyes darted away from mine for a fraction of a second. It is none of your concern why I want them, she snapped. I am the rightful heir. I am stepping into my role as the head of this family, and part of that role requires me to manage the physical assets immediately. We have a temporary cash flow issue that needs to be addressed this afternoon. I have already contacted a private buyer downtown who is willing to take the car and the watch off our hands for a very generous cash payout. A temporary cash flow issue. I said the words rolling around in my mouth like a bitter pill. I looked past Brenda and locked eyes with Terrence. Terrence was standing completely frozen. His face, which had been flushed red with anger just moments ago, had suddenly drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the click. Sweat was beginning to bead along his hairline. I tilted my head, studying him. I started doing the math out loud. Your car dealership is facing eviction and asset seizure by the end of the week. But commercial landlords do not send leg breakers to your house. They just lock the doors and call their lawyers. So a commercial eviction would not cause a temporary cash flow issue that requires selling a vintage Porsche for quick cash on a Tuesday afternoon. No. A panic sell like that means someone very dangerous is demanding immediate payment. Terrence swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Shut up, Simone. He muttered, his voice lacking all of its previous bravado. You do not know what you are talking about. But I did know. The puzzle pieces snapped perfectly into place. I let out a low whistle, shaking my head. It is the tables, is it not, Terrence? I asked, my voice dropping into a deadly calm register. Or maybe the sports books. You did not just run a business into the ground, you gambled away the operating capital. And now the people you owe money to are not the kind of people who send strongly worded emails. They are the kind of people who show up at your house. That is why you need the watch and the car today. You are trying to pay off a bookie before he breaks your legs. How dare you? Jada shrieked, stepping forward and shoving Terrence behind her like she was shielding him from a physical attack. Her face was contorted with pure hysterical rage. "You have absolutely no right to sit there and psychoanalyze my husband. He is an entrepreneur who took a calculated financial risk. So what if he owes a few people some money? All great businessmen carry debt. It is part of building an empire." I actually laughed out loud at that. A calculated financial risk. Jada, your husband is a degenerate gambler who is trying to pawn a dead man's watch to save his own skin. And your mother is actually helping him do it. "It is our money, Simone!" Jada screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "It is our inheritance. Uncle Roland was our blood, and everything he owned belongs to us. If we want to take his stupid watch and his old car and sell them to pay off Terrence's business loans, then that is exactly what we are going to do. It is none of your business how we spend our family wealth. You are just a jealous, bitter orphan trying to keep us from what is rightfully ours. Just hand over the keys and the safe codes and get out of our way." The sheer profound ignorance radiating from my sister was staggering. They had convinced themselves that probate law was just a suggestion. They thought death worked like a piñata where you just hit the deceased person until money fell out, and whoever grabbed it first got to keep it. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. "Jada, let me explain something to you because clearly, neither you nor your brilliant entrepreneur of a husband have ever bothered to read a book," I said, speaking slowly and clearly so even they could understand. "You do not own anything. Not the Porsche, not the Rolex, not a single dime of Uncle Roland's money. Right now, those assets belong to his estate. Until a judge reads a verified will and issues a formal letter of testamentary, nobody in this room has the legal authority to sell a single paperclip from his office, let alone a classic car." Brenda slammed her hands down on the table, mirroring my posture, but lacking any of the control. "I do not care about your legal mumbo-jumbo," she yelled. "I am not waiting for some judge in a dusty courtroom to give me permission to take what is mine. We need the money today, and you are going to give it to us." "And what if I do not?" I challenged her, keeping my voice perfectly level. "What are you going to do, Brenda? Are you going to mug me in the middle of a corporate law firm? Are you going to dig up Uncle Roland and shake him down for loose change? If you take that car and try to sell it to a private buyer without the title and the death certificate transferred into your name, that is grand theft auto. If you try to pawn a $40,000 watch that does not belong to you, that is a felony. Do you really want to go to federal prison to cover your son-in-law's gambling debts?" Terrence panicked. He stepped out from behind Jada, his eyes wild with desperation. "We are not leaving without those keys, Simone," he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "You do not understand the kind of pressure I am under right now. These people are not playing games. I need that watch. You owe us. Roland owed us. Roland did not owe you a single breath." I fired back, standing up from my chair. "And I do not owe you anything but a front row seat to your own destruction. You walked into this building thinking you could bully me into bailing you out of your pathetic mistakes. You thought you could use Uncle Roland's death as a get-out-of-jail-free card. But you are going to leave this room with absolutely nothing. You are not getting the watch. You are not getting the car. And you are certainly not getting a dime of his money." Brenda let out a primal scream of frustration. It was the sound of a woman realizing her entire scam was falling apart. She reached into her cheap handbag, her hands shaking violently. "Fine," she hissed, pulling out a thick, folded piece of paper. "If you want to play by the rules, Simone, then we will play by the rules. But you are going to wish you had just handed over those keys when you had the chance. Because when the lawyer sees what I have in my hand, you are going to be thrown out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on your back." Brenda held the folded paper like a weapon, but before she could slam it onto the table, Jada stepped forward and placed a hand on our mother's arm. "Let me handle this part, Mom," Jada said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet condescension. She stepped right up to the edge of the mahogany table. She raised her left hand and began slowly twisting the large cubic zirconia wedding ring on her finger. It was a nervous habit she disguised as a display of wealth. Jada looked down at me with a look of profound pity. The kind of fake sympathy you give to a stranger on the street. We do not want to leave you out in the cold, Simone. We really do not. Despite how horribly you have treated our mother today, we are still a family. And family takes care of their own. So I'm going to offer you a little bit of grace. I did not react. I just watched her twist that cheap ring. Terrence and I had a long talk last night. Jada continued, a smug smile spreading across her face. We decided that it is time for us to step up and honor Uncle Roland's legacy properly. His estate in Buckhead is simply too massive to sit empty. It is a 10,000 square foot mansion sitting on 4 acres of prime real estate. It needs life. It needs a real family to fill those halls. So Terrence and I went ahead and officially terminated the lease on our luxury apartment this morning. We are moving into the Buckhead estate by this weekend. I sat perfectly still. My face was a mask of carved stone. Inside my mind, however, a massive steel trap was slowly clicking shut. I let her words wash over me, analyzing the sheer magnitude of the disaster they had just orchestrated for themselves. They had voluntarily surrendered their only legal residence. They had broken a lease, which meant they likely forfeited their deposit and were on the hook for massive penalty fees, all based on the delusion that they could simply pack their boxes and move into a dead man's mansion. I did not interrupt her. In negotiations, there is a golden rule. When your opponent is actively destroying their own position, you never interrupt them. You let them talk. Jada took my silence as submission. Her smile grew wider, her confidence swelling. The house is incredibly dated, of course. She sighed, waving her hand dismissively. All that dark wood and vintage leather, it smells like an old man. Terrence has already contacted a luxury contractor. We are going to gut the entire first floor. I am turning Roland's dusty old library into a massive walk-in closet, and we are knocking down the walls in the dining room to create an open-concept entertainment space. We are going to host Galas Simone. We are going to elevate the family name and live the lifestyle we deserve. The disrespect was breathtaking. Uncle Roland had built that library book by book. It was his sanctuary. And this woman who had not spoken to him in a decade was already planning to tear it apart with a sledgehammer to make room for her cheap shoes. But as an act of grace, Jada said, leaning forward slightly, since you were his little charity project, I think it is only fair that you get a keepsake. We are hiring a junk removal company to clear out the master bedroom on Friday. But before they throw all his old clothes into the dumpster, you can come by the house and pick out a few of his old winter coats. It gets cold in your little apartment, does it not? You can take 2, maybe 3 coats. Then we are donating whatever is left to a homeless shelter. She looked incredibly proud of herself. She thought she was being generous. She thought offering me the scraps of the man who raised me would somehow put me in my place. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to beg her for access to my own childhood home. She wanted me to acknowledge her as the new queen of the castle. Terrence stepped up beside her, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist. You should thank your sister Simone. He said, his voice regaining a little bit of its previous arrogance. Most people would not even let you on the property after the way you disrespected your mother. But Jada has a huge heart. You get 3 coats, and then you hand over your set of keys to the front gate. You will not be allowed back on the premises once the contractors start the demolition. It is a massive liability issue. I looked at the two of them. They were practically glowing with stolen pride. They had mapped out an entire future based on assets they did not own, money they did not have, and legal rights that did not exist. I slowly reached out and picked up my glass of sparkling water, taking another deliberate sip. The ice was starting to melt, but the water was still freezing cold. I swallowed and set the glass back down perfectly, centering it on a dark knot in the mahogany wood. Let me make sure I am understanding this correctly, Jada. I said, my voice soft and measured. You officially terminated your lease. You signed the paperwork and handed it over to your landlord this morning. Jada rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy sigh. Yes, Simone. Try to keep up. We signed the termination papers at 9 o'clock. The movers are coming on Thursday to pack up our furniture. We are completely moved out by Friday afternoon. Like I said, we are taking over the Buckhead estate. And you did this without having a key to the house, without having the alarm codes, without a single piece of paper from the probate court stating you have the legal right to occupy the property. I laid out the facts, flatly stripping away all of her decorative delusions. Brenda scoffed from the side, shaking the folded piece of paper in her hand. We do not need permission from a court. I already told you I am the matriarch. What I say goes. And I say my daughter is moving into that house. I ignored Brenda, keeping my eyes locked on Jada. So, on Friday afternoon, when your movers have everything you own packed into the back of a truck, where exactly are you planning to sleep? Because if you think you are driving that truck up the private driveway of Uncle Roland's estate, you are going to be in for a very rude awakening. Jada narrowed her eyes, her fake, generous smile finally cracking. What is that supposed to mean? The house belongs to the family. We are moving in. You are not moving anywhere near that house, Jada, I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. You are not gutting the library. You are not knocking down walls. And you are absolutely not hiring a junk removal company to touch a single thread of Uncle Roland's clothing. If you or your husband or those movers step 1 foot onto that property, the private security firm that monitors the estate will have you arrested for criminal trespassing before you even make it to the front door. Terrence scoffed loudly, trying to sound tough. You do not control the security, Simone. You are just a guest here. Oh, Terrence. I smiled, a cold, empty smile. You have absolutely no idea what I control. But please go ahead with your plan. Pack your bags, break your lease, make yourselves completely homeless by Friday. It is going to be incredibly entertaining for me to watch you try to explain to your movers why you cannot get past the front gates. Jada's face flushed a deep, angry red. She slammed her hand down on the table, her cheap ring clattering against the wood. You are bluffing, she hissed. You are just trying to scare us because you know you lost. You know Mom is taking everything and you cannot handle it. I am not the one who is going to be sleeping in a moving truck this weekend, Jada, I replied calmly. You dug your own grave this morning when you signed those termination papers, and now you are going to lie in it. Terrence stepped forward, pushing Jada gently behind him. He puffed out his chest and adjusted the lapels of his flashy suit, trying to project an aura of absolute authority. He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and misplaced amusement. You think you can talk to my wife like that? He sneered, his voice echoing in the large room. You think because you sit in a corporate office all day that you understand how real wealth works. Let us get one thing straight, Simone. You are nothing but a glorified secretary. You push papers around for people who actually make the big decisions. You arrange meetings and format spreadsheets. I am a business owner. I am an entrepreneur. I know how to manage assets, and I know how to generate capital. I rested my hands on the table and let him speak. There is a specific kind of danger in a man who is both incredibly arrogant and profoundly uneducated. Terrence was the textbook definition of that danger. He genuinely believed that running a failing used car lot into the ground gave him the financial acumen to manage a multi-million-dollar corporate estate. You see, Simone. Terrence continued pacing slowly back and forth behind the heavy leather chairs. I am already 5 steps ahead of you. I did not just sit around waiting for this little meeting to take place. I took initiative. I have already contacted a top-tier commercial broker. We are liquidating Roland's entire real estate portfolio, every single building, every single lot. It is all going on the market. Brenda nodded proudly from the sidelines, a wide, greedy smile stretching across her face. That is right, she chimed in. Terrence is stepping into the role of financial director for the family. Since Roland had no wife and no children, the law is very clear. Every single thing he owned defaults to me as his oldest living relative. I am the sole beneficiary, and I trust Terrence to turn those dusty old buildings into liquid cash. We are going to build generational wealth. I looked back and forth between the two of them. It was a spectacular display of collective delusion. They were feeding off each other's ignorance, creating a fantasy world where they were suddenly real estate tycoons. You contacted a commercial broker. I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. To liquidate Uncle Roland's portfolio. Exactly. Terrence smiled, looking incredibly pleased with himself. The broker is already drawing up the listings for the Midtown Shopping Center and the office park out in Alpharetta. We are going to put them on the open market by next week. The broker assured me we can cash out the smaller properties by the end of the month. That will give us the immediate capital we need to renovate the Buckhead estate and clear up my temporary business debts. It is a flawless strategy. You should be taking notes, Simone. I did not take notes. I just stared at him, feeling a cold wave of absolute contempt wash over me. You really think selling a 10-story commercial office building is exactly like selling a beat-up Honda Civic off a gravel lot, do you not? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. Terrence stopped pacing and frowned. Real estate is real estate, he said defensively. You find a buyer, you sign the papers, and you take the check. It is not rocket science. It is not rocket science. I agreed. But it does require a basic understanding of the law which you clearly do not possess. Let me educate you, Terrence, since you think I am just a glorified secretary. You cannot liquidate a commercial real estate portfolio in 30 days. It is legally and physically impossible. Commercial properties require months of due diligence. There are environmental impact assessments, there are structural inspections, and most importantly, there are tenants. I stood up slowly, leaning over the table to make sure he heard every single word. Uncle Roland's office park in Alpharetta is currently leased by 2 major tech firms and a regional bank. They have 10-year ironclad leases. You cannot just put a for sale sign on the lawn and kick them out. If you try to break those leases, the corporate penalties alone would bankrupt you in a week. They would tie you up in litigation for the next 5 years. Terrence shifted his weight uncomfortably but tried to maintain his tough guy facade. The broker said he handles all of that. He said once Brenda signs the authorization forms, the brokerage firm takes care of the tenants and the inspections. And who exactly is this miracle broker? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Let me guess. You did not call a reputable corporate firm. You called someone you found on a late-night television commercial, or maybe a guy you met at a cheap golf course. What is his name, Terrence? I spoke to Donovan Hayes, Terrence said, lifting his chin defiantly. He is a heavy hitter in the Atlanta market. He knows how to move properties fast and he understands our situation. I actually let out a sharp laugh. Donovan Hayes. Of course you called Donovan Hayes. Donovan is a bottom feeder, Terrence. He preys on desperate, ignorant families who suddenly find themselves dealing with probate court. Let me tell you exactly what Donovan promised you. He promised you a quick cash buyout. He told you he has private investors ready to pay cash tomorrow, right? Terrence blinked, clearly caught off guard. Yes. He said they could expedite the closing process if we took a slight reduction in the asking price. A slight reduction? I shook my head in disbelief. Terrence, you absolute fool. Donovan is going to offer you 30 cents on the dollar. He is going to buy those properties for a fraction of their actual worth, and then he is going to flip them to a real developer for a massive profit. You are literally trying to give away Uncle Roland's legacy for pennies because you are too desperate and too stupid to understand its actual market value. Do not call my husband stupid, Jada yelled, stepping forward again. He is doing the best he can to manage this mess. You are not helping. You are just criticizing everything we do because you want the money for yourself. I do not want the money, Jada. I snapped, my voice finally rising to fill the massive room. I want to protect the empire that my uncle spent 40 years building with his bare hands. He started with a single loan and bought his first warehouse when he was 25 years old. He worked 18-hour days. He sacrificed his own personal life to build a portfolio that commands respect in this city. And you three walk in here smelling like cheap perfume and desperation, thinking you can just hand it all over to a predatory broker so you can pay off a gambling debt. I turned my attention back to Terrence, who was now visibly sweating. His expensive suit suddenly looked very restrictive, but the sheer financial stupidity is not even the best part, Terrence. I said, walking around the edge of the mahogany table until I was standing just a few feet away from him. The best part is the legal jeopardy you just placed yourself in. Did you sign any preliminary paperwork with Donovan Hayes? Did you send him an email claiming you were the executor of the estate? Terrence swallowed hard, refusing to make eye contact. I signed a standard representation agreement, he mumbled, just to get the ball rolling. Brenda gave me verbal permission. Verbal permission from a woman who has zero legal authority over the estate. I clarified, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Terrence, Uncle Roland's estate has not gone through probate. There is no letter of testamentary. Brenda has not been appointed the executor by a judge. By signing a legal document representing assets that do not belong to you and authorizing a broker to list properties you do not own, you just committed fraud. Terrence backed away, his eyes wide with sudden terror. No, he stammered. I was just acting as an advisor. I did not commit fraud. It is family property. The state of Georgia does not care about your family tree, Terrence. I told him coldly. If Donovan Hayes puts those properties on the market today, and the State Real Estate Commission finds out that the listing agent was authorized by someone with no legal claim to the deed, they will revoke his license, and they will refer your name to the district attorney for attempting to sell stolen property. You did not secure your future this morning, Terrence. You basically wrote a confession letter to the police. Brenda rushed forward, grabbing Terrence by the arm and pulling him away from me. Stop listening to her, Brenda shouted, her voice shrill and frantic. She is making this all up to scare you. She is just using big legal words to confuse us. We are the blood relatives. The law protects the family. When the lawyer gets here, we will show him our paperwork and all of this will be over. She is not going to win. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still in the center of the room. I looked at my mother, seeing the sheer panic hiding just beneath her aggressive posturing. She was clinging to her delusion like a person drowning in the ocean clinging to a piece of driftwood. She genuinely believed that if she just yelled loud enough and demanded respect, the universe would simply hand her millions of dollars. You brought paperwork, Brenda? I asked, tilting my head slightly. You actually brought forged documents to a corporate law firm. I did not say forged. Brenda snapped quickly, her eyes darting toward the security camera in the corner of the room. I brought the real documents. The documents that prove exactly what Roland wanted. And once they are on the table, you are going to be legally required to shut your mouth and hand over the keys. I look at the thick folded piece of paper trembling in Brenda's hand. I do not ask her to unfold it. Not yet. I let her hold on to her little secret weapon for just a few minutes longer because I am not finished with Terrence. I turn my eyes slowly away from my mother and lock my gaze back onto my brother-in-law. The sheer panic that had briefly washed over his face has been replaced once again by that stubborn, ignorant pride. He actually believes that Brenda's mysterious piece of paper is going to save him from the absolute mess he has made of his life. Let us put the paperwork on pause for just a second, Brenda, I say, keeping my voice low and completely stripped of emotion. I want to circle back to the incredibly proactive financial strategy Terrence was just bragging about. Because as a glorified secretary, I really want to make sure I am taking accurate notes on how a true entrepreneur operates in a crisis. Terrence crosses his massive arms over his chest, trying to look bored, but the heavy sweat beading along his hairline betrays him completely. What else is there to understand, Simone? He scoffs, shifting his weight from one expensive leather shoe to the other. I handled the situation. I managed the risk. That is what a real man does when his family is facing a temporary setback. I did not sit around waiting for a lawyer to give me permission to act. I leaned forward, resting my forearms flat against the cold mahogany wood of the boardroom table. I look at him with the focused, lethal intensity of a corporate prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. Let me make sure I have the exact timeline of your brilliant risk management, Terrence, because the fine details are very important in the eyes of the law. I begin laying out the timeline piece by piece, building the walls of the trap around him. You found out Uncle Roland died last Tuesday morning. By Thursday, your commercial landlord sent you a final eviction notice for the gravel lot where you sell your used cars. By Friday, the private creditors started calling your personal cell phone. I am not talking about the bank, Terrence. I am talking about the people who do not use contracts or collections agencies, the people demanding the money you lost gambling on sports. You panicked. You did not have the cash and you knew they were coming to your luxury apartment to collect it. So you called Donovan Hayes, the bottom feeder real estate broker. Terrence nods his chest, puffing out again, completely oblivious to the corner he is backing himself into. Like I said, I brought in a professional to handle the liquidation. I keep pushing, laying out the bait step by calculated step. And you told Donovan to immediately list the Alpharetta Office Park and the Midtown Shopping Center. You signed a representation agreement with his brokerage firm. Then you took that signed agreement and you showed it directly to your private creditors. Jada steps forward, trying to take credit for what she thinks is a stroke of financial genius. We showed them the paperwork to prove we had massive capital coming in. She says, proudly tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. It was actually my idea, Simone. I told Terrence to take the real estate listing agreement down to the people he owed money to. It proved that we were about to be incredibly wealthy. It proved we were good for the money and that they just needed to be patient for a few more weeks. I look at my sister, feeling a genuine sense of awe at her absolute lack of survival instinct. You took a fraudulent commercial real estate listing to a bookie. I state the facts plainly, letting the sheer stupidity of the action hang in the freezing air of the boardroom. It is not fraudulent. Terrence snaps, his anger flaring up again as he takes a heavy step toward the table, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. It is collateral. I leveraged our incoming family assets to secure a temporary extension on my debts. The creditors looked at the estate portfolio, they saw the estimated market value of the buildings, and they agreed to back off until the properties sell. It is basic economics, Simone. You use what you have to protect what is yours. I do not blink. I do not move a single muscle. I just let the silence stretch out for 3 long, agonizing seconds. I want the high-definition microphone hidden in the ceiling to pick up absolutely no background noise for this next part. I need the audio recording to be crystal clear. So, Terrence, just so I understand you completely, I say, my voice ringing with a sharp, terrifying clarity in the quiet room. You have already promised the capital from Uncle Roland's unprobated assets to your private creditors to cover your personal gambling debts. You used a dead man's properties as collateral for a private loan before a judge ever declared who legally owns those properties. Terrence looks down at me, a smug, victorious smile spreading across his sweating face. He actually thinks he has won the argument. He thinks he has proven his dominance and outsmarted me in front of his wife and mother-in-law. He has absolutely no idea that he just stepped right into the center of the snare and handed me the rope. Yes, I did. Terrence says loudly and proudly, his voice echoing off the glass walls. I secured the family. I leveraged the assets. That is called being proactive, Simone. You should try it sometime, instead of just taking orders from your boss and living a miserable, lonely life. The smile that breaks across my face is completely genuine. It is not a defensive smirk. It is a slow, cold, terrifying smile that makes Jada instinctively take a step back. I do not look at Terrence. Instead, I tilt my head back, and I look directly up at the small black dome of the security camera nestled in the corner of the ceiling. The little red light is glowing steadily, recording every single frame of this magnificent disaster. I look back down at Terrence. My smile does not fade. That is not called being proactive, Terrence, I say softly, almost to myself. That is called intent to commit financial fraud. The smug look on his face freezes instantly. The victorious smile melts away, leaving behind a mask of pure confusion. He blinks, staring at me like I just spoke a foreign language. What? He breathes out the word barely audible. Let me explain exactly what just happened here, Terrence, I say, standing up from my heavy leather chair. I smooth down the front of my blazer, keeping my eyes locked on his terrified face. You just admitted on a recorded line inside a corporate legal facility that you used assets you do not legally own to secure a financial transaction. That is the textbook legal definition of fraud, but it gets so much worse for you. Because you used a commercial real estate listing representing millions of dollars, it crosses the threshold into a major felony. Terrence shakes his head, taking a slow step backward until his back hits the edge of an empty chair. No, he stammers, raising his hands defensively. I was just using it as a guarantee. It is family money. It is going to be ours anyway. It does not matter what you think is going to happen in the future, Terrence. I reply, my voice slicing through his pathetic excuses like a scalpel. You made a financial pledge using a dead man's portfolio to pacify illegal creditors. You conspired with a predatory broker to list properties without a letter of testamentary. And the absolute best part is that you just proudly confessed to the entire scheme right to my face while the security camera recorded every single syllable. Jada grabs his arm, her eyes wide with sudden terror. Tell her she is lying, Terrence. She pleads, shaking him slightly. Tell her you did not commit a crime. We were just borrowing against our inheritance. Mom said it was fine. Mom said we could do it. I turn my gaze to Jada. You are an accessory, Jada. I inform her casually. You just admitted out loud that it was your idea to take the fraudulent paperwork to the creditors. You advised your husband to commit a felony. The district attorney is going to absolutely love the audio from this meeting. They will not even need to interrogate you. You both just handed them a neatly wrapped conviction with a bow on top. Terrence begins to hyperventilate. His chest heaves up and down, and he desperately pulls at the collar of his expensive tailored shirt as if the fabric is suddenly choking him. The reality of the situation is finally crushing his massive ego. He realizes that he did not outsmart anyone. He realizes that his creditors are not going to get a dime from the Alpharetta office park. And when they find out he used fake collateral to buy time, they are going to come looking for him. And if the creditors do not get him first, the federal prosecutors absolutely will. You set me up. Terrence gasps, pointing a trembling finger at me. You tricked me into saying that. You asked a leading question. This is entrapment. I cannot entrap you, Terrence. I laugh coldly. I am not a police officer. I am just a glorified secretary who happens to know the law. You dug this grave completely by yourself. I just handed you the shovel and asked you to describe the dirt. Brenda can see her entire empire crumbling before her eyes. The reinforcements she brought to intimidate me are currently having a synchronized panic attack in the middle of the boardroom. Terrence is pacing frantically, muttering under his breath about calling his broker to cancel the listings, while Jada is crying real tears, now realizing her dreams of a walk-in closet have just been replaced by the very real threat of a prison cell. Brenda steps forward, shoving past her crying daughter. She marches right up to the mahogany table, her cheap floral perfume washing over me again. She is desperate to regain control of the narrative. She is desperate to prove that she is still the matriarch and that she still holds all the cards. Enough of this nonsense. Brenda screams, slamming her hand down on the table so hard that my glass of water spills over, soaking into the wood. I am sick and tired of you playing these little mind games, Simone. You think you are so smart. You think you can use technicalities to steal my money and send my family to jail. But you are wrong. You are dead wrong. She raises the folded piece of paper in her hand, waving it aggressively in my face. The edges of the paper are slightly worn, as if it has been folded and unfolded 100 times. I brought the proof, Simone. Brenda sneers, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure desperation and greed. I brought the only document that matters in this entire building. I did not want to show it to you until the lawyer got here, but you leave me no choice. You need to be put in your place once and for all, because when you read what is on this paper, you will realize that you have absolutely no power here. You are nothing but a squatter in my empire. Brenda stood at the edge of the mahogany table, holding that folded piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. Her hand was actually shaking, but not from fear. It was shaking with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. She genuinely believed that whatever was written on that crumpled page was going to magically erase the felonies her son-in-law had just confessed to. She thought a single piece of paper was going to hit the reset button on reality, and hand her the keys to the kingdom. I did not reach for the document. I just watched her, letting her bask in her fleeting moment of imaginary triumph. "Do you know what year this is from, Simone?" Brenda asked, her voice dropping into a dramatic, theatrical whisper. She carefully began to unfold the paper, smoothing out the deep creases with her chipped red fingernails. The paper itself was stiff and slightly yellowed at the edges, looking like it had been stored in a damp shoebox at the back of a closet for a couple of decades. I did not answer her. I just kept my eyes locked on her face, waiting for the performance to unfold. "This is from 1998. Brenda announced, her chest puffing out with pride. "Does that year ring a bell for you, Simone?" "It should, because that is the exact same year you claim I abandoned you. But you see, you only know your twisted little version of the story. You do not know what happened between me and my brother after I left. You do not know the conversations we had behind closed doors." Jada sniffled, wiping the last of her panic tears away. She stepped closer to our mother, her eyes locked on the document. Terrence also stopped his frantic pacing. He wiped the heavy sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve and cautiously took a step back toward the table. Like a pair of starving animals smelling meat, they were immediately drawn to the promise of salvation held in Brenda's hands. Roland understood why I had to leave. Brenda continued, her voice growing louder and more confident with every word. He understood that a woman like me needed to find herself. He knew I was meant for bigger things than changing diapers and struggling to pay electric bills, and he respected me for it. He respected my sacrifice so much that exactly 1 week after I left you on his porch, he went to a lawyer and he drafted this. With a sudden, aggressive motion, Brenda slapped the document down flat onto the polished mahogany table. She pressed her hand firmly against the center of the page, sliding it across the smooth wood until it stopped right in front of me. "Read it and weep, little girl." Brenda sneered, a nasty, vicious smile twisting her features. "That is Roland's true last will and testament. It is signed, dated, and legally bound. And it clearly states that upon his death, every single worldly possession he owns, his bank accounts, his real estate, his personal belongings, everything reverts directly to me, his oldest sister, his blood." Terrence let out a massive sigh of relief, a loud booming sound that echoed through the boardroom. A wide, arrogant grin spread across his face, completely replacing the sheer terror I had put there just minutes ago. "See?" Terrence laughed, clapping his hands together. "I told you we were good, Jada. I told you I had this all under control. If Mom owns the estate, then my representation agreement with Donovan Hayes is perfectly legal. There is no fraud. There is no crime. We are the owners. We can do whatever we want." Jada let out a squeal of delight, throwing her arms around Terrence's neck. "Oh, thank God." She cried, her fake grief completely forgotten in the face of sudden wealth. "I knew you were smart, Terrence. I knew Mom would not let us down. We are going to be so rich." It was a fascinating psychological display. In the span of 30 seconds, they had gone from facing federal indictments to planning their luxury renovations, again all because Brenda threw a dusty piece of paper on the table. They did not even bother to read the fine print. They did not question why a multi-millionaire real estate mogul would leave his entire empire on a single sheet of paper from the late 90s. They just saw what they wanted to see. Brenda leaned over the table, placing both of her hands flat against the wood, staring me down. Her cheap floral perfume mixed with the smell of old paper. "You thought you could walk in here in your fancy tailored suit and steal my family legacy?" Brenda hissed, her eyes burning with decades of built-up resentment. "You thought just because you lived in his house and went to the expensive schools he paid for that you were somehow his equal. But you were never his equal, Simone. You were a project. You were a tax write-off. You were just his little charity case." She tapped a long red fingernail against the bottom of the document, right next to a dark blue ink stain. "I am his blood," Brenda declared, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "Blood is permanent. Charity is temporary. When Roland drew up this will, he made sure to protect his real family. He made sure that the wealth stayed exactly where it belonged. So you can pack up your little notepad and your expensive silver pen, and you can march right out of this building. Because you get absolutely nothing. Nothing, Jada echoed, stepping up beside Brenda and crossing her arms. You hear that, Simone? Not even the winter coats. I changed my mind. I am not letting you anywhere near the Buckhead house. You do not get a single dime and you do not get a single memory. You can go back to your miserable little apartment and figure out your own life. We are officially cutting you off. I looked down at the document sitting on the table in front of me. I did not touch it. I did not even lean forward. I just let my eyes scan the text from upside down. It was a standard boilerplate template, the kind of generic legal form you could print out at a public library. The text was faded from years of sitting in a box, but the signature at the bottom was written in heavy black ink. It spelled out Roland's name, but the looping letters lacked his signature sharp angles. It looked like someone had spent hours practicing it, trying to get the flow right, but failing to capture the natural pressure of his hand. But the most glaring detail, the detail that practically screamed off the page, was sitting right at the bottom right corner. It was a notary stamp. A heavy dark blue seal pressed firmly into the paper. The ink of the stamp was incredibly fresh. It had not faded or bled into the fibers of the paper the way the typed text had. It looked like it had been pressed onto the page yesterday. I felt a cold, dangerous calm settle over me. I had suspected they were greedy and desperate, but I had deeply underestimated their willingness to commit blatant, brazen felonies right inside a corporate law firm. They had not just brought a fake will, they had actively forged signatures and secured a fraudulent notary seal to try and steal a multi-million-dollar corporate trust. You actually think this piece of paper is going to save you? I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The quietness of my tone caught them off guard, cutting through their loud celebrations like a knife. Brenda frowned, her triumphant smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. It does not just save me, Simone. It makes me the undisputed owner of this entire estate. The law is the law. A notarized will trumps whatever ridiculous claims you think you have. The lawyer is going to walk through those doors, he is going to read this document, and he is going to hand me the keys. It is over. You lost. I looked at Brenda, then at Jada, and finally at Terrence. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, a united front of profound ignorance and unyielding greed. They were so confident in their little scam. They had convinced themselves they were the smartest people in the room. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to completely destroy their lives. I did not yell. I did not argue with them. I just let the silence stretch out, allowing them to savor their final moments of imaginary victory. Because the trap was fully set, the bait had been taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. Terrence misinterpreted my silence completely. He thought the sight of the document sitting on the table had finally broken my spirit. He thought I was staring at the faded paper in defeat, realizing that my mother had checkmated me. He mistook my tactical patience for surrender. And like any arrogant predator who thinks they have backed their prey into a corner, he decided this was the perfect moment to strike and secure his total victory. He reached over the table and popped the brass latches on his cheap faux leather briefcase. The metallic click was loud in the quiet room. He reached inside and pulled out a second piece of paper. Unlike the forged will, this paper was bright, white, crisp, and completely fresh. He slammed it down on the table next to the fake will and slid it aggressively across the polished wood until it bumped against my leather notepad. I looked down at it. It was a waiver, a hastily typed, horribly formatted document with uneven margins. It explicitly stated that I, Simone, willingly surrendered any and all rights to contest the 1998 will. It claimed that I acknowledged Brenda as the sole beneficiary and that I would not pursue any legal action against the estate or its heirs. I even noticed a misspelled word in the second paragraph. He had spelled beneficiary with 2 F's. Terrence pulled a cheap plastic ballpoint pen from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the paper. It bounced once and rolled toward my hand. Sign it. Terrence commanded, his chest puffed out again. You read the will, Simone. You know Mom gets everything. The estate is legally hers. But we do not want you tying up the probate courts with frivolous lawsuits just because you are bitter and jealous. We do not have time to deal with your tantrums. So you are going to pick up that pen and you are going to sign this waiver right now, officially waiving your right to challenge us. I looked from the waiver to the plastic pen and then finally up to Terrence. I did not move my hands. I just stared at him, letting the absolute absurdity of his demand hang in the freezing air. He actually thought a piece of printer paper he probably typed up in his living room could override federal estate laws. He thought writing a generic surrender clause would magically stop a multi-billion-dollar corporate law firm from executing their legal duties. When I did not immediately pick up the pen, Terrence decided to escalate the situation. He placed both of his heavy hands on the edge of the mahogany table and leaned his large frame forward, trying to cast a physical shadow over me. He lowered his voice, dropping it into a gravelly tone, trying to sound like a hardened mob boss instead of a failing used car salesman drowning in debt. I am not asking you, Simone. Terrence growled, his eyes narrowing. If you do not sign that paper right now, I am going to make a phone call. I have associates, people who handle problems for me. You live in that nice little luxury apartment downtown, right? If you do not put your name on that line, I will have my guys kick your door in before sunset. They will empty out your entire apartment. They will take your electronics, your jewelry, your designer clothes, and they will leave you sleeping on the bare hardwood floor. And if you try to call the cops, my guys will make sure you deeply regret it. The threat was so violently out of line that for a fraction of a second the room felt like it had been plunged underwater. He was threatening me with a home invasion. He was threatening me with physical violence and robbery inside a corporate legal facility. And the most pathetic part was that I knew exactly who his associates were. They were not his employees. They were the illegal bookies he owed money to. He was trying to weaponize the very people who were currently hunting him to intimidate me. I slowly shifted my gaze to Jada. My younger sister was standing right next to him. She did not look horrified. She did not tell her husband to stop threatening her sister. Instead, she just smiled a cruel, vicious little smirk and crossed her arms. Then I looked at Brenda, my mother. She was watching a grown man threaten her flesh and blood daughter with violence and theft, and she was nodding in approval. She smoothed down the lapels of her bright yellow blazer, looking incredibly proud of the monster she had allowed into her family. It was actually fascinating to watch. Terrence was actively trying to speedrun a federal prison sentence. He had already confessed to financial fraud. He had conspired to commit real estate fraud. And now he was adding extortion and conspiracy to commit burglary to his rapidly expanding criminal resume, all while standing directly underneath a high-definition security camera with a live microphone. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I did not reach for my phone to call the police. I completely ignored his threat, as if he had just commented on the weather. I reached out my hand, but I did not pick up his cheap plastic pen, and I did not touch his ridiculous waiver. Instead, I reached past them and picked up the 1998 will. Hey, Terrence barked, snapping his fingers at me again. I told you to sign the waiver. Put the will down. I ignored him entirely. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, holding the forged document up to the light of the massive crystal chandelier hanging above us. I examined it with the cold surgical scrutiny of a woman who spends 50 hours a week analyzing complex corporate contracts. I let my professional instincts take over completely, detaching from the emotional circus standing on the other side of the table. I felt the weight of the paper between my fingers. It was too thick to be standard printer paper from the late 90s. It was premium resume stock, the kind you buy in bulk at an office supply store today. I inspected the typed text. The ink was faded, yes, but it was uniform. Real typewriter ink from 1998 would have shown slight variations in pressure. This had been printed on a laser printer and deliberately faded, probably by leaving it out in the sun or wiping it with a damp cloth. But the real masterpiece was the signature and the stamp. I traced my eyes over the signature at the bottom. Roland. It was written in a heavy black gel pen. Uncle Roland was left-handed, and he always wrote with a distinctive sharp slant. This signature was perfectly straight fluid and completely lacked the heavy pressure points of a left-handed writer. Someone had traced it. They had probably found an old birthday card or a piece of mail and spent hours tracing his name against a bright window. And then there was the notary stamp. The fatal flaw. I looked at the dark blue seal pressed into the bottom right corner. I read the name inscribed inside the circular border. Devin Marshall. My private investigator had pulled Terrence's high school yearbook last night. Devin Marshall was Terrence's old football teammate who now ran a sketchy check-cashing business in a strip mall. The ink on the stamp was so fresh it practically shined under the chandelier light. "You know, Terrence," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the document, "if you are going to commit a massive federal crime, you should really pay attention to the details. This is incredibly sloppy work." Terrence slammed his fist on the table. "Shut up and sign the waiver, Simone." He yelled, losing his mob boss persona completely and reverting back to a panicked thug. "I am not playing games with you. I will make the call right now." I slowly lowered the document and placed it gently back onto the table, perfectly aligned with the edges of my notepad. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Make the call, Terrence." I challenged him, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "Call your associates. Send them to my apartment. But you should probably warn them that my building has a 24-hour armed concierge, biometric elevator locks, and a private security detail in the lobby. Your guys will not even make it past the revolving doors. But please send them. It will just add another charge to your indictment." Brenda stepped forward, snatching her cheap knockoff bag off the chair. She was furious that her grand reveal had not reduced me to a crying mess. "You are delusional, Simone," she shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "You are sitting there making up lies because you know you are beaten. That will is real. The signature is real. The notary is real. You are just a bitter little girl who cannot handle the fact that Roland loved me more than he ever loved you." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing for her. The last remaining thread of familial obligation severed cleanly in my chest. "You think this is real, Brenda?" I asked, tapping my silver fountain pen against the forged document. "You think a judge is going to look at a fresh notary stamp on a 20-year-old piece of paper and just hand you the keys to a multi-million-dollar empire? You think the estate attorney is going to walk in here, look at your misspelled waiver, and just write you a check?" Just then, the heavy brass handle of the boardroom door began to turn. The sound echoed loudly, cutting through the tension like a gunshot. All three of them jumped, turning their heads toward the entrance. The waiting game was over. They had laid all their cards on the table. They had confessed to their crimes, submitted their forged documents, and issued their pathetic threats. They had done all the heavy lifting for me. I sat up straight, adjusting the lapels of my blazer, and folded my hands neatly on top of the mahogany table. The real meeting was finally about to begin. I kept my eyes locked on the bottom right corner of the document, studying the fresh blue ink of the notary stamp. I traced my gaze just a few inches to the left, where a date had been scribbled in messy handwriting right below Devin Marshall's signature. I read the date twice, just to make sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me in the bright light of the chandelier. October 14th. I stared at those two words, feeling a strange mixture of absolute disgust and dark amusement. October 14th was exactly 3 days ago. 3 days ago, Uncle Roland was lying in a private room in the intensive care unit at Emory University Hospital. He was in a medically induced coma. He was attached to a ventilator, a heart monitor, and multiple intravenous lines. His kidneys had already failed, and the doctors had explicitly told me he had zero brain activity. He had not opened his eyes or moved a single muscle in over a week. Yet somehow, according to the narrative Brenda and Terrence were trying to sell me, Uncle Roland had miraculously woken from his coma, sat up in his hospital bed, grabbed a heavy black gel pen, and signed a legally binding amendment to his will. And he apparently did all of this in the presence of a strip mall check-cashing notary who just happened to play high school football with my brother-in-law. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They had not just forged a document. They had forged a document with a date that could be disproven by a single glance at a hospital medical chart. I slowly lowered the paper back to the table. I looked up and met my mother's gaze. Her eyes were hard and defiant, daring me to challenge her. I decided to give her one final opportunity to save herself. Not because I loved her or felt any lingering sense of loyalty. I did it because I wanted the security camera hidden in the ceiling to record me offering her an exit. I wanted the prosecutors to hear me giving her a chance to walk away before she completely destroyed her own life. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this, Brenda?" I asked, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. I tapped my silver pen against the edge of the mahogany table. "Are you entirely sure you want to hand this specific piece of paper to the estate attorney when he walks through those doors?" Brenda narrowed her eyes, her jaw tightening. She reached across the table and snatched the document right out from under my hand, clutching it tightly to her chest like a shield. "Do not try to play your little psychological games with me, Simone." She spat her cheap floral perfume washing over the table again. "Submitting this is exactly what I am going to do. It is my money. I know my rights. This piece of paper proves that Roland wanted me to have the estate. Submitting this makes it a binding legal declaration, Brenda." I warned her, speaking slowly so every word would register on the audio recording. "If you put that piece of paper back in your cheap bag right now and walk out of this building to go back to your miserable life, I will not say a word. I will let you walk away. But if you hand that document to an officer of the court, there is no going back. You cannot claim it was a mistake. You cannot claim you were confused. The moment it leaves your hand and enters the legal record, you are committing a massive federal crime." Jada scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, Simone. Stop trying to scare her. You are just panicking because you realize you have no leverage. You are trying to intimidate Mom into hiding the will so you can steal the money. We are not stupid." I looked at my sister. "Actually, Jada, you are profoundly stupid," I corrected her calmly. "You are standing in the middle of a corporate law firm with a document that claims a brain-dead man signed a contract 3 days ago. If you think the lawyers here are not going to verify the timeline, you are living in a complete fantasy world." Terrence stepped forward, his face flushing red again. He pointed a thick finger at me. "Do not listen to her, Brenda," he urged, his voice thick with desperation. "She is bluffing. She is just trying to protect her own interests. Give the paper to the lawyer as soon as he walks in. We are taking control of this estate today." Brenda nodded, her chin lifting in a display of supreme arrogance. "I am not backing down," she declared. "I am the matriarch of this family, and I am claiming what belongs to me. You can sit there and throw around empty threats all you want, Simone, but I know the law protects the bloodline." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. "Fine," I whispered. "Do your worst." Right on cue, the heavy brass handles of the boardroom doors turned. The thick glass doors swung open smoothly on their hinges, and Mr. Caldwell stepped into the room. Mr. Caldwell was Uncle Roland's trusted estate attorney. He was a man in his late 60s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in a courtroom. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal gray suit and carrying a vintage leather briefcase. He walked with the quiet, confident authority of a man who managed billions of dollars in corporate assets every single day. He expected to walk into the boardroom and find me sitting alone, waiting to finalize the administrative paperwork for the trust transition. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks just 2 steps into the room. He looked at Terrence, standing aggressively near the table in his flashy, cheap suit. He looked at Jada, who was currently wiping away fake tears and pretending to look heartbroken. And finally, he looked at Brenda, who was standing at the head of the table clutching a crumpled piece of paper like a weapon. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, utterly bewildered by the circus that had invaded his private boardroom. "Excuse me," Mr. Caldwell said, his deep, authoritative voice echoing off the glass walls. The boardroom was reserved for a private executive meeting. I believe you must be in the wrong office. Before I could even introduce him, Brenda launched her attack. She did not hesitate. She did not introduce herself politely. She marched right past the empty leather chairs and intercepted Mr. Caldwell before he could even set his briefcase down on the table. "We are exactly where we are supposed to be," Brenda announced loudly, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You must be Roland's lawyer." "I am Brenda. I am Roland's older sister, his closest living blood relative, and the new head of this family." Mr. Caldwell blinked, looking down at the woman standing in his personal space. "I am sorry," he said, his tone polite but incredibly frosty. "The receptionist did not inform me that Ms. Simone would be bringing guests to our strategy meeting." "We are not guests," Jada chimed in, stepping up to stand beside our mother. "We are the rightful heirs. Simone is just here because she is lonely and has nothing better to do. We are the ones you need to be talking to." Mr. Caldwell looked past them, making eye contact with me. I did not say a word. I just gave him a very small, almost imperceptible nod. He had been Uncle Roland's lawyer for 20 years. He knew exactly who Brenda was. He knew all about the sister who abandoned her child for a cruise. He knew about the decades of silence. He understood immediately what was happening. Brenda did not wait for him to respond. She shoved the forged 1998 will directly into Mr. Caldwell's chest, pressing the paper against his expensive suit jacket. "I am not here to chat," Brenda declared, tapping the paper aggressively. "I am here to execute my brother's final wishes. That is his true last will and testament. It is signed, it is notarized, and it legally names me as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. Every single bank account, every piece of real estate, and every physical asset reverts to my name immediately." Mr. Caldwell slowly raised his hands and took the document, holding it by the edges, as if it were contaminated. He looked at the faded text and the fresh blue notary stamp. He did not say anything. He just stood there, absorbing the sheer audacity of the woman standing in front of him. Terrence, feeling emboldened by Mr. Caldwell's silence, stepped right up next to Brenda, puffing out his chest. "And we need the liquid assets transferred by this Friday," Terrence ordered, barking at the senior partner of a major law firm as if he were a drive-through cashier. "I have already contacted a commercial broker to liquidate the Alpharetta Office Park and the Midtown Shopping Center. We need you to draw up the deed transfers immediately so my broker can list the properties on the open market tomorrow morning. We have temporary cash flow issues that need to be resolved today, so I also need the keys to Roland's vintage Porsche and the code to the safe where he keeps his platinum Rolex." Mr. Caldwell looked from the forged document in his hands to Terrence's sweating face. He slowly lowered the paper. The look in his eyes was not anger or intimidation. It was a look of profound clinical fascination. He was looking at Terrence the way a scientist looks at a particularly stupid insect trapped under a microscope. Jada crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. "And we need the keys to the Buckhead mansion," she added, her voice shrill and demanding. "Terrence and I are moving into the house this weekend. We have already terminated our apartment lease and hired contractors to start gutting the first floor on Monday. We need the alarm codes and the gate passes right now so we can start making the house fit for a real family." Brenda smiled, a triumphant, greedy smile that stretched from ear to ear. She turned her head slightly to shoot me a venomous, glaring look of pure victory. "You heard them, lawyer," Brenda said, pointing a manicured finger at Mr. Caldwell. "The family has spoken. The legal document is in your hands. Do your job and transfer my wealth so we can get out of this freezing room and get on with our lives." Mr. Caldwell stood perfectly still. He did not yell. He did not call security. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, and slipped them onto his face. He looked down at the forged 1998 will one more time. He read the messy signature. He read the date. October 14th. He read the name of the strip mall notary. Then he slowly looked up and locked eyes with me across the long mahogany table. I was still sitting back in my heavy leather chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my silver pen resting quietly next to my notepad. Mr. Caldwell took a slow, deep breath. The silence in the room was absolute. Brenda, Terrence, and Jada were practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the lawyer to bow his head and hand them the keys to an empire. They had completely bought into their own lie. They thought they had successfully ambushed the legal system and won the lottery. But they had no idea that Mr. Caldwell was not looking at the document to verify its authenticity. He was looking at the document to calculate exactly how many years in federal prison they had all just volunteered to serve. Mr. Caldwell stood at the head of the mahogany table holding the forged 1998 will between his thumb and index finger like it was a piece of contaminated biohazard waste. He did not look angry. He did not look intimidated by Terrence standing aggressively in his personal space. He simply looked profoundly confused. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses further up the bridge of his nose and tilted his head, studying the fresh blue ink of the notary stamp. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Brenda was holding her breath, a tight, victorious smile frozen on her face. She was waiting for the prestigious lawyer to bow to her authority. Mr. Caldwell slowly lowered the document. He did not look at Brenda. He did not look at Terrence. He looked straight across the length of the table and made direct eye contact with me. Ms. Simone. Mr. Caldwell said, his deep voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any panic. Did these individuals actually just walk into my office and hand me a forged testamentary document in a recorded legal facility? The question hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Brenda gasped, her victorious smile shattering instantly. "What did you just say?" she shrieked, stepping forward and pointing a shaking finger at his face. "How dare you? That is an authentic legal document. My brother signed that paper. I brought it here in good faith, and you are legally required to execute it. If you try to deny my claim, I will sue you. I will sue this entire law firm, and I will have you disbarred." Terrence puffed out his chest, trying to back her up. "You better watch your mouth, old man," Terrence barked, trying to project the mob boss persona again. "You are looking at the new owners of the estate. We are the ones paying your retainer now. You work for us, so you better process that paperwork and transfer those deeds before I decide to fire you and find a lawyer who actually knows how to do his job." Mr. Caldwell did not even blink. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, casually wiping his hands as if touching their document had physically soiled them. "I do not work for you, sir," Mr. Caldwell replied, his tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "And I assure you I know exactly how to do my job, which is why I can tell you with absolute legal certainty that it is entirely impossible for this document to be valid. Even if we ignore the fact that the notary stamp is fresh ink and the date of the amendment claims Roland was conducting business while in a medically induced coma, this document is fundamentally useless." Jada stepped forward, her voice trembling. "What do you mean it is useless?" she demanded, gripping Terrence's arm tightly. "It is a will. It says Mom gets everything. You have to follow the will." Mr. Caldwell placed the forged document face down on the table. "Ma'am," he said, looking directly at Brenda with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. "You cannot inherit an estate that does not exist. Roland did not just write a new will to cut you out. He dissolved his entire personal estate 5 years ago." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Brenda physically stumbled, taking a step back as if she had been struck. Terrence dropped his arm, his mouth falling open. "Dissolved." Brenda whispered the word, barely making it past her lips. "What do you mean dissolved? He was a multimillionaire. He owned buildings. He owned a mansion. He had millions in the bank. You cannot just dissolve that. You are lying. You and Simone are conspiring to steal my money." "He did not burn the money, Brenda." I spoke up, my voice cutting through her rising hysteria. I remained seated, watching the absolute destruction of their grand master plan. "He just moved it to a place where parasites like you could never reach it." Mr. Caldwell clasped his hands behind his back. stepping perfectly into his role as the executioner of their delusions. 5 years ago, Roland recognized that upon his passing, certain estranged family members might attempt to surface and lay claim to his life's work. To prevent his assets from being tied up in a messy public probate court, he retained my firm to execute a comprehensive asset protection strategy. We liquidated his personal holdings and transferred every single deed, every bank account, the vintage vehicles, and the Buckhead mansion into a massive, irrevocable corporate trust. Terrence was shaking his head frantically, completely unable to process the legal reality. A trust, he stammered. So what? A trust still has beneficiaries. Brenda is his sister. She is the blood relative. The trust defaults to her. An irrevocable corporate trust does not default to anyone, sir. Mr. Caldwell explained patiently, dismantling Terrence's last shred of hope. It is a completely independent legal entity. It bypasses the probate system entirely. A judge does not rule on it. A will cannot contest it. The trust operates exactly like a private corporation, and a corporation does not care about your family tree. It only cares about its board of directors and its legally appointed trustee. Total silence hit the room again. It was a different kind of silence this time. It was not the silence of anticipation. It was the suffocating, crushing silence of absolute defeat. The realization was slowly dawning on them that there was no inheritance. There was no probate judge they could cry to. There was no legal loophole they could exploit. The millions of dollars they had been planning to spend, the real estate empire they had been planning to liquidate, the mansion they had been planning to renovate, it was all locked behind an impenetrable legal wall. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Terrence. If the properties belonged to a corporate trust. Terrence breathed out, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Then who authorizes the sales? Who controls the deeds? I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and slowly pushed myself up from the heavy leather chair. I stood at my full height, smoothing down the front of my tailored blazer. I did not look at Mr. Caldwell. I kept my eyes locked directly on the three people who had walked into this room, thinking they could step on my neck to reach the top. I buttoned the center button of my blazer, my movements slow, deliberate, and completely in control. The shift in power was absolute. I was no longer the quiet observer sitting at the table. I was the absolute authority in the room. Uncle Roland did not leave me anything in a will, Brenda. I said, my voice ringing with a cold, hard clarity that echoed off the glass walls. I do not get a percentage of the estate. I do not get an allowance, because 4 years ago Uncle Roland stepped down and legally appointed me as the chief executive officer and the sole voting trustee of the holding company. Brenda stared at me, her face completely drained of color. Her chest was heaving, but she could not seem to draw in enough air. I do not inherit the estate. I continued, stepping out from behind my chair and walking slowly toward them. I already own it. I control every single bank account. I hold the deeds to every single commercial property. I own the vintage Porsche you wanted to pawn. I own the platinum Rolex. I am the sole signatory on the corporate accounts. Jada let out a small, pathetic whimper, shrinking back behind Terrence. And most importantly, I said, stopping just a few feet away from them, I am your landlord. Terrence looked like his knees were about to buckle. He reached out and grabbed the back of an empty chair to steady himself. You! He choked out, staring at me like I had just grown a second head. You own the buildings. I own the Midtown Shopping Center. I confirmed, nodding slowly. I own the Alpharetta Office Park. Which means, Terrence, that when you signed that representation agreement with Donovan Hayes this morning, using those properties as collateral for your illegal gambling debts, you were attempting to defraud my corporation. You did not just commit a federal crime. You committed a federal crime against me. And I have the security footage, the audio recording, and the fraudulent paperwork you just handed to my attorney to prove it. Terrence let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He realized in that exact moment that his life as a free man was effectively over. He had handed a signed confession to the CEO of the company he was trying to steal from. But I was not done. I turned my attention to Jada, who was currently trembling so hard her cheap jewelry was rattling. And Jada, I said, my voice softening into a tone of mock sympathy that made her flinch. You officially terminated your apartment lease this morning. You hired movers to pack up everything you own by Friday. You told your landlord you were vacating the premises. But as the sole trustee of the estate, I am officially informing you that you do not have authorization to step foot on the Buckhead property. Your gate codes have already been deactivated. If you or your movers pull up to that driveway, my private security team will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Jada burst into tears. Real, ugly, sobbing tears. But Simone, we have nowhere to go, she wailed, clutching her face. We gave up our apartment. We cannot afford to sign a new lease. We are going to be homeless. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. I looked at her, completely unmoved by her tears. Family takes care of their own, Jada. Is that not what you said to me 20 minutes ago when you offered me the scraps of Uncle Roland's closet? I am just offering you a little bit of grace. I am sure you can find a nice cardboard box to decorate, or maybe you can move in with Mom. I finally turned to Brenda, the great matriarch, the woman who had marched into this room demanding my chair, demanding my respect, and demanding an empire. She looked completely broken. The fake yellow blazer seemed to hang loosely on her shoulders. The cheap knockoff bag was resting limply on the floor where she had dropped it. All the arrogance, all the entitlement, all the loud, aggressive posturing had been completely crushed under the weight of reality. Brenda, I said, speaking her name like a curse word, you came in here talking about blood. You talked about your rights and your sacrifices. But the truth is, you sacrificed nothing. You are a parasite who thought you could find a new host. But Uncle Roland spent the last 20 years making sure that you would never be able to touch a single thing he built. He knew exactly what you would do the moment he died. He knew you would try to forge documents. He knew you would try to steal from me. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and vacant. There is a monthly allowance that has been deposited into your checking account on the first of every month for the last 10 years. I stated flatly, watching her eyes widen further. You told Jada it was an anonymous government grant for single mothers. It was not. It was a charitable disbursement from Uncle Roland's corporate trust. He felt pity for you. He paid your rent so you would not end up on the street. Brenda shook her head slowly, denying the truth even as it was staring her in the face. No, she whispered. Yes, I confirmed. And as my first official act as the sole voting trustee this morning at 8 a.m., I legally terminated that charitable disbursement. The money is gone, Brenda. You are completely cut off. You have absolutely nothing. You do not get the millions. You do not get the house. You do not even get your monthly rent check anymore. I leaned in close enough that she could feel the absolute freezing contempt radiating from me. I told you that the only thing you were going to get out of this room today was an escort out of the building. I turned to Mr. Caldwell, who was watching the execution with quiet, professional approval. Mr. Caldwell, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, please contact the front desk. Tell them to send up the armed security detail, and while you have them on the line, please ask them to place a call to the Atlanta Police Department Fraud Division. Tell them we have 3 individuals currently detained in the executive boardroom who have just submitted a forged legal document and confessed to conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Terrence let out a terrified yell and bolted for the glass doors. He shoved the heavy brass handles, completely abandoning his wife and his mother-in-law in a desperate bid to escape the federal charges closing in on him. But Mr. Caldwell had already pressed the silent panic button under the mahogany table the moment Brenda shoved the forged will into his chest. As Terrence yanked the doors open, 2 massive security guards in dark suits were already standing in the hallway, blocking his exit completely. They stepped forward, placing their heavy hands on Terrence's chest and shoving him forcefully back into the boardroom. "Sit down, sir," one of the guards commanded, his voice booming with authority. "The police are already on their way up the elevator." Terrence collapsed backward into the heavy leather chair, his chest heaving as the two security guards took up positions blocking the glass doors. There was nowhere left to run. The grand escape had failed before it even began. He stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had gone from envisioning himself as a wealthy real estate tycoon to a trapped criminal in a matter of minutes. I did not even look at him. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my silver tablet. With a few quick taps on the glass, I wirelessly connected it to the massive high-definition monitor mounted on the far wall of the boardroom. The large screen flared to life, instantly casting a bright white glow over the terrified pale faces of my family. I wanted them to see it. I did not want them to just hear my words and try to convince themselves I was bluffing. I wanted the absolute reality of their financial destruction to burn itself into their retinas before the police arrived to put them in handcuffs. I pulled up the master financial ledger for Uncle Roland's holding company. It was a complex spreadsheet filled with hundreds of properties, bank accounts, and corporate assets. "Look at the screen, Jada," I commanded, pointing my silver pen at the monitor. My sister slowly lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She squinted at the bright screen. I zoomed in on a specific property deed, read the address. "Jada," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "Read the name of the legal owner of your building." Jada let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hands to her mouth. It was the deed to her luxury condominium complex. The towering glass building downtown where she and Terrence had lived for the past 3 years, pretending to be high society elites. Listed clearly right under the property address was the name of Uncle Roland's corporate trust. "You do not just rent an apartment," I explained slowly, letting the sheer weight of the truth crush her remaining delusions. "You have been paying your rent directly into my corporate accounts for 3 years. You have been living under my roof this entire time. And since you so graciously signed a voluntary lease termination agreement this morning, effectively breaking your contract, you have legally evicted yourselves from my property. You handed the keys back to the holding company. You made yourselves homeless to move into a mansion you will never own." Jada turned slowly to look at Terrence. The fake grief and the arrogant entitlement were completely gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You idiot!" Jada screamed, lunging forward and hitting Terrence hard on the shoulder. "You told me this was a good idea. You told me we were securing our future. You made me sign those papers." Terrence did not even try to defend himself. He just sat there, staring at the floor, completely broken. But I was not finished. I swiped the screen of my tablet, bringing up a different section of the financial ledger. This page showed a decade-long transaction history, a long column of green numbers indicating recurring monthly payments. "Now it is your turn, Brenda," I said, turning my attention to my mother. She was still standing near the head of the table, clutching her cheap knockoff bag like a life preserver. She refused to look at the screen, so I read the numbers out loud for her. $5,000, I announced. $5,000 deposited directly into your personal checking account on the first day of every single month for the last 10 years. You told Jada and your friends that it was a special government grant for displaced single mothers. You built an entire persona around being an independent survivor who beat the system. You bragged about your financial savvy. Brenda closed her eyes tightly, shaking her head. "Stop it, Simone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Do not do this. I am going to do exactly this, Brenda." I fired back, stepping closer to the screen. "Because you need to understand exactly who you have been biting all these years. That money did not come from the government. It came from an anonymous philanthropic fund managed by Uncle Roland's trust. He knew you were drowning in credit card debt. He knew you were one step away from living in your car. So he paid your rent and bought your groceries from the shadows. The man you just called a selfish old fool was the only reason you have a roof over your head. I tapped the screen one final time, pulling up a scanned banking order with a bright red digital stamp across the top. "Look at the timestamp on this document, Brenda," I demanded. "Open your eyes and look at it." She slowly opened her eyes and looked at the screen. The timestamp read, 8:00 a.m. Today's date. "That is the exact moment I legally terminated the philanthropic fund," I told her, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "The bank has already frozen the outgoing transfers. You will not receive a single dime on the 1st of next month, or the month after that, or ever again. The charity is officially over. You are entirely cut off." Brenda let out a low, agonizing wail. It was the sound of a woman realizing that her entire life was built on a foundation of lies that had just crumbled to dust. She dropped her bag and sank into one of the heavy leather chairs, burying her face in her hands. The boardroom was filled with the sounds of their collective ruin. Jada sobbing, Terrence hyperventilating, and Brenda wailing. It was a symphony of consequences they had spent their entire lives trying to avoid. But the grand finale had not even started yet. I walked back to the mahogany table and picked up the forged 1998 will, the piece of paper they thought was going to be their golden ticket. I held it up so Terrence could see it. "You thought you were so incredibly clever, Terrence," I said, tapping the fresh blue notary stamp with my fingernail. "You thought you could just call up your old high school football buddy Devin Marshall and have him stamp a fake document to solve all your massive financial problems. Did you honestly believe a multi-billion-dollar law firm would not verify the notary public on a 20-year-old will?" Terrence flinched violently at the sound of Devin's name. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with sheer panic. "How do you know about Devin?" He choked out, his throat completely dry. "Because I do not just sit around typing spreadsheets, Terrence," I replied smoothly, leaning over the table. "I am the chief executive officer of a massive corporate empire. When Uncle Roland went into the hospital, I hired a private investigator to monitor the entire estate and everyone connected to it, because I knew exactly what kind of vultures would start circling the moment he took his last breath. My investigator watched you walk into Devin's check-cashing business in that rundown strip mall yesterday afternoon. He watched you hand Devin a thick brown envelope full of cash." Terrence gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning completely white. "And more importantly," I continued, my voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel, "my investigator walked into that exact same shop an hour after you left. He had a very polite conversation with Devin." I swiped my tablet again, bringing up a scanned legal affidavit. It was signed and dated by Devin Marshall. He informed Devin that notarizing a forged will to defraud a corporate trust of over $15 million carries a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. I explained, letting the words sink in. "Devin is a coward, Terrence. Just like you." He folded in less than 5 minutes. He signed a sworn affidavit confessing to the forgery. He handed over the security footage from his own shop showing you handing him the cash. "Devin already confessed, Terrence. He gave you up to save himself." Terrence let out a guttural scream of absolute despair. He grabbed his own hair, pulling at the roots. He had been betrayed by his own accomplice before the scam had even begun. The entire operation was compromised from the very start. "And because you just submitted this forged legal document to an officer of the court," I said, gesturing toward Mr. Caldwell, who was watching the meltdown with quiet professional satisfaction. "You just committed a major federal offense right here in this room. You crossed the line from planning a crime to executing a crime." Jada turned on Terrence again, her hands balled into fists. "You are going to prison," she screamed, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. "You are going to prison, and you are going to drag us down with you. I am filing for divorce. I am not going down for your stupid gambling debts. I am leaving you." She tried to storm past him toward the doors, but the 2 security guards immediately stepped forward, raising their hands. "Nobody is leaving this room," the taller guard stated firmly, pushing Jada back toward the table. You are all detained until law enforcement arrives. Jada spun around and looked at our mother. Mom, do something. She pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Tell them I did not know. Tell them it was all Terrence. You have to protect me. But Brenda just sat there staring blankly at the polished wood of the table. The great matriarch was completely paralyzed. The woman who claimed she was royalty, who claimed blood was the ultimate pass, had absolutely nothing left to say. She had gambled her entire future on a piece of forged paper and a false sense of superiority, and she had lost everything. I stood at the head of the table watching them tear each other apart. There was no joy in it. There was no dramatic sense of triumph. I just felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The terrified 11-year-old girl who had waited on that hot concrete porch for a mother who never returned was finally at peace. The debt was settled. The ghosts were banished. I reached down and picked up my sparkling water, taking one final slow sip. The ice had completely melted, but the water tasted incredibly sweet. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway outside the glass doors. The elevator chimes dinged, signaling the arrival of the authorities. Mr. Caldwell calmly stepped forward and opened the boardroom doors to greet the 4 uniformed Atlanta Police Department officers who walked into the room carrying handcuffs and heavy utility belts. The officers took one look at the crying, screaming mess of my family, and then looked at Mr. Caldwell for direction. Mr. Caldwell simply pointed a manicured finger at Terrence, Brenda, and Jada. Those 3 individuals, officers. Mr. Caldwell said, his voice perfectly calm and professional, have just attempted to defraud a corporate trust. We have the forged documents, the security footage, and the audio confession ready for your evidence technicians. The officers moved in without hesitation. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking into place was the most beautiful sound I had heard all week. The moment the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around Terrence's wrists, his brain finally snapped. He realized his life as a free man was officially over. In a last desperate act of sheer mindless panic, he violently jerked his arms forward, breaking the officer's grip for just a fraction of a second. He did not run for the glass doors. Instead, he lunged directly across the wide mahogany table, his heavy chest crashing onto the polished wood. He was reaching frantically with sweating fingers for the forged 1998 will. He actually believed, with the flawed logic of a cornered criminal, that if he could just grab that single piece of paper and tear it into tiny shreds, the federal charges would magically disappear. He thought he could destroy the physical evidence and simply walk away from the nightmare he had created. But Mr. Caldwell was not just a lawyer sitting in an ivory tower. He was a seasoned veteran of the legal system and corporate warfare who anticipated every possible move a desperate person might make. Before Terrence's fingers could even brush the edge of the paper, Mr. Caldwell calmly pulled the document back. With a smooth, practiced motion, he slid the forged will into a thick, tamper-proof plastic evidence folder he had already pulled from his vintage briefcase. He sealed the red adhesive strip across the top, locking the forgery safely inside, and handed the folder directly to the lead detective. Terrence slammed his fists against the table, screaming in frustrated agony as the 2 massive security guards and the police officers immediately tackled him. They pulled his arms roughly behind his back, shoving his face against the cold wood, and secured the handcuffs tightly. The sharp click of the metal echoed loudly in the room, sealing his fate. Seeing her husband pinned to the table like a common criminal, Jada completely abandoned ship. There was no loyalty in my family. There was only raw, selfish preservation. She did not cry out for him. She did not ask the officers to be gentle or try to comfort the man she had married. Instead, she turned on him with the viciousness of a trapped animal. "You ruined my life!" Jada screamed, her voice pitching into a shrill, hysterical shriek that bounced off the glass walls. "You stupid, pathetic loser. You told me this was going to work. You told me we were going to be rich and live in a mansion. I am not going to federal prison for your disgusting gambling debts. I am filing for divorce today. I am never speaking to you again." Terrence twisted his head, struggling against the officer's heavy grip, and glared up at his wife with pure, unfiltered hatred. The veins in his neck were bulging, and his expensive tailored shirt tore slightly at the shoulder seam. "Do not act like you are an innocent victim, Jada." Terrence yelled back, his face dark red and slick with sweat. You were the one who told me to take the papers to the bookie. You told me to use the estate as collateral so we could keep our luxury apartment. She is an accessory officer. He shouted, looking wildly at the police. She planned the whole thing with me. She told me to do it. The officers did not care about their domestic disputes or their screaming matches. Another officer stepped forward and pulled out a second pair of handcuffs, aiming them right at Jada. She shrieked, trying to back away, but there was nowhere left to go in the boardroom. The metal clicked securely around her wrists, and her fake designer bag dropped to the floor, spilling expensive makeup, maxed-out credit cards, and car keys all over the hardwood. Brenda watched her golden child get placed in handcuffs, and her entire reality finally broke. The great matriarch, the woman who had marched into this room demanding my chair, demanding my respect, and demanding an empire, realized that her foundation of lies had completely burned to the ground. She did not try to run. She did not try to yell at the officers or assert her dominance. She turned to the only person in the room who had the power to stop the nightmare. She turned to me. Brenda dropped heavily to her knees, right there on the expensive boardroom floor. She crawled forward, ignoring the police officers, and reached out, grabbing the hem of my tailored blazer with both hands. Real tears were streaming down her face, now ruining her heavy makeup and leaving dark, streaky stains down her cheeks. "Simone, please." Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking with absolute desperation, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please do not do this to us. Tell them to stop. Tell them it was all a huge misunderstanding. I carried you for 9 months, Simone. I gave birth to you. You cannot send your own mother and your little sister to jail. We are family. You have to show mercy. We are your blood." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. I looked at her cheap yellow blazer, her shaking hands, and her terrified, pleading eyes. I searched my heart for even a single ounce of sympathy. I searched for a remnant of the little girl who had cried on that hot concrete porch, hoping her mother would come back from the gas station. But there was absolutely nothing there. The space where my love for her used to reside was completely empty, replaced by a solid, impenetrable foundation of self-respect and boundaries that she could never break through again. I reached down and firmly peeled her shaking fingers off my blazer, stepping back so she was left kneeling alone on the empty floor. Family is the man who stayed up helping me with my math homework when I was 11 years old. I said, my voice perfectly steady, cold, and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Family is the man who wiped my tears when I finally realized you were never coming back from your luxury cruise. You are not my family, Brenda. You are just the woman who left me on a porch. And you are the woman who just tried to steal everything that good man built. I looked at the three of them, their faces pale and utterly defeated, as the officers began to pull them up and push them toward the heavy glass doors. "You have 30 days to vacate my properties," I told them, delivering the final absolute blow. "Whatever junk you left in that downtown apartment is going straight into a dumpster on the 31st day. Now get out of my boardroom." The walk of shame was spectacular. The officers escorted Brenda, Jada, and Terrence out of the glass doors and marched them straight through the center of the prestigious law firm. Dozens of highly paid attorneys, paralegals, and wealthy corporate clients stopped what they were doing and stepped out of their private offices to watch the procession. Terrence kept his head down, staring at his expensive shoes, trying to hide his face from the onlookers. Jada was sobbing uncontrollably, her designer heels dragging across the plush carpet. Brenda just stared straight ahead, looking like a hollow, empty shell of the arrogant, aggressive woman she had been just an hour earlier. The heavy elevator doors slid shut behind them, sealing them away from my life forever. 6 months have passed since that morning in the boardroom. The legal system moves slowly, but it moves with absolute crushing certainty when federal fraud is involved. Terrence was officially indicted by a federal grand jury. Facing overwhelming, irrefutable evidence, including the boardroom security footage, his own loud recorded confession, and the sworn legal affidavit from his notary buddy, Devin, he took a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. He is currently looking at 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and conspiracy. His failing used car dealership was immediately seized by his commercial landlord, and his remaining inventory was auctioned off for pennies to pay his massive debts. He is completely bankrupt, ruined, and headed for a cold concrete cell. Jada followed through on her screaming threat in the boardroom. She filed for divorce the very next morning, desperately trying to legally distance herself from his criminal charges and his financial ruin. But the law does not forget willing accessories. While she managed to avoid actual prison time by cooperating fully with the federal prosecutors, she was hit with massive legal fees and crushing restitution penalties. She lost everything. The luxury leased cars, the expensive clothes, the fake wealthy lifestyle she loved to flaunt. It all vanished into thin air overnight. Today, Jada and Brenda are living together in a cramped, run-down studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city, right next to a noisy, elevated interstate highway. They have absolutely no money, no assets, and no future prospects. Since I legally terminated Brenda's monthly allowance from the trust, she was forced to get a grueling minimum wage job working the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner just to pay their cheap rent. Her feet swell from standing all night, and she deals with rude customers for tips. Jada works at a discount retail store, spending her days folding cheap clearance clothes instead of shopping for designer labels. They are completely miserable, trapped in a tiny, poorly insulated box, with their own toxic bitterness, constantly screaming and blaming each other for the total destruction of their lives. I have not spoken a single word to either of them since the police escorted them out of the building. As for me, I am absolutely thriving. Taking over Uncle Roland's massive corporate trust was a heavy responsibility, but I was more than ready for it. Over the last 6 months, I have aggressively expanded the real estate empire, acquiring 3 new high-value commercial properties and increasing the holding company's overall portfolio value by 20%. But more importantly, I am honoring Roland's true legacy. Last month, I took a large portion of the profits from the Midtown Shopping Center and established a permanent educational scholarship fund in his name. It is a foundation specifically designed to help teenagers aging out of the foster care system pay for college tuition and secure safe housing. I am using his wealth to actually help children who were abandoned, just like he helped me all those years ago. I sit in my spacious corner office, looking out over the beautiful, bright Atlanta skyline. I am not lonely. I am surrounded by incredible mentors, loyal friends, and brilliant colleagues who respect my mind and value my presence. I built my own table from the ground up, and I get to choose exactly who sits at it. Have you ever had to legally protect yourself from your own toxic bloodline? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who thought they could manipulate, extort, and steal from you just because you share the same DNA? Let me know how you handled your situation in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in cutting off toxic people and fiercely protecting your peace. Thank you so much for watching my journey, and remember that the family you actively build around yourself is always stronger than the broken family you have to leave behind.